And joining us on the line right now, former governor of the state of New Hampshire, former White House Chief of Staff, Governor John Sununu is with us. Governor, good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Want to mention,
how are you today?
We're doing great. Well, we mentioned you've written a new book called The Quiet Man, which is about George H.W. Bush, under whom you served. We'll get to that in a moment, but I guess it's safe to say you've written a book about the president under whom you served. The Sununu name is inextricably linked to the Bush name in politics. So as we look around at New Hampshire politics, very important state for people who want to be the next president of the United States, are you on board with the candidacy of one Jeb Bush?
I have so many friends running in this election. I'm avoiding selecting this time around. There's a lot of great candidates out there. I am partial to governors and former governors. There's a handful of really good ones in the Republican primary, and I think it's important for the process to kind of sort things out this time around.
So you're keeping, as they say, your powder dry.
Very dry.
Well, keeping your powder dry means at some point you might fire, or am I reading between the lines? You're not going to endorse anyone at all?
I as of now, my intention is not to endorse anyone at all. But we've got over a year in this process, so take it a step at a time.
But I mean that's surprising to me because I mean you are so linked to the Bush presidencies of the past. People remember you as a White House Chief of Staff under H.W. Bush.
Look, I've got a couple of sons in politics. You pay attention to what they're doing. You do what you're going to do in a way that doesn't impact negatively one way or the other the second generation, the next generation that's in there, and I think it's appropriate this time around for me to do that.
But your son, former Senator John Sununu, he might endorse somebody.
Yeah, I think John has actually publicly endorsed Kasich.
Oh, Kasich, really? That's very interesting.
That's interesting.
Let me ask you about New Hampshire politics in general, though, because obviously it's critically important, and with so many candidates, it's going to be a huge primary. And everyone is saying that Jeb Bush is the front runner because of the national polls, but he's not doing too well in New Hampshire. He's not doing too well in Iowa. And historically, well, it's been a love-hate relationship New Hampshire has had with the Bush family. First time around in 1980, the elder got trounced by Ronald Reagan, and that ended his White House hopes. But then in 1988, famously, he came back and beat Bob Dole. That was a huge win. You were a big part of that, Governor Sununu. But then George W. Bush running against McCain, he lost there. So what do you think New Hampshire has in store for Jeb Bush in general and the rest of the Republican field?
Well, what New Hampshire looks for is candidates who are willing to come in and talk directly to the people. And the style is important. Substance is important. I always refer to it as a see me, touch me, feel me campaign. And the candidates that do that do well. And I suspect that Jeb understands that. I suspect that Walker understands that. I suspect Rubio understands it. Kasich certainly does. All these guys that have done retail politics all their life are going to come up, and it's going to be a tough fight.
You know, the name of your book is The Quiet Man, and it's about George H.W. Bush, under whom you served. Why did you choose that as the title, and how did you tell me about the book?
Well, this is a president I truly believe has been underappreciated, and I thought with the long view of history now possible, looking back, I wanted to put between two covers all his accomplishments, including the fact, by the way, that most people don't understand, that he passed more solid, significant domestic legislation than any president except Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt. And I felt it was a good time to do it. He's in his 90th year now, going to be 91 tomorrow. And I felt it was sort of a tribute to a guy I really respected. I wanted the public to now begin to appreciate how significant and momentous his presidency was.
George Herbert Walker Bush was the first president I voted for, and I remember very vividly that Republican convention when he said, "Read my lips, no new taxes," and that sort of sealed the deal for me. I loved that. I got to ask you, looking back now, it was Mitchell in the Senate, and who was the speaker back then?
Tom Foley was the speaker.
And they basically held a gun to Bush's head because they said, if you don't raise taxes, we're going to have a government shutdown. Do you think the media at that time would have said the Democrats in the House and the Senate were responsible for a government shutdown if that happened?
I suspect the liberal media would have done what they always do. But what was so critical about that time, remember, he had just sent young men and women over to the Middle East preparing to kick Saddam Hussein out. This was September, October of 1990. You could not have done what he did in getting Saddam Hussein out if the Defense Department budget had been cut by a sequester or something like that. It was a serious issue, and part of the reasons that he had to pay the ransom of, the first tax he accepted in the package was a gas tax, an increase in the gas tax that had not been adjusted for inflation in almost a decade. It wasn't until after the little Republican revolt led by Gingrich that the Democrats were able to change that and add a little bit of a personal income tax increase. But he got three and a half times the size of the tax increase in spending cuts, and that budget, with the rules for budgeting that we put in there, created all those surpluses of the 90s that everybody likes to look back at.
Yeah, but boy, they hammered him on it. It was a tough time, I would think, for you to be in the White House at that time.
Well, he spent his political capital for the country, and that's part of the message that I want. This is a president that never liked to brag about himself, and I just thought, as a former chief of staff to that president, I ought to do a little bragging for him.
You say he was intelligent, thoughtful, and modest, and I would add, based on the very limited interaction I had with H.W. Bush, a really, really lovely man, very thoughtful man, very immensely polite, always thinking about others.
He was, and in a way that was part of his key to his success. Getting Mitterrand and Kohl and Thatcher and others who might have had slightly different agendas to follow along. I think if people take a look at the book, they'll see exactly what you've just talked about, and I think they'll enjoy some of the inside machinations that take place in the White House. It's a good book to read as we're going into this presidential season.
Do you think we've lost the civility that we once had in politics? I mean, one thing you could say about H.W. Bush, a very civil politician, but it seems like we've lost that in American politics today.
I think political tone across the country is set by the president in the White House, and he certainly set that tone, and that seeped into the relationships, not seeped in, it was pushed into the relationships with Congress. But I think even governors used that as a role model while the president was there, and I think it can be restored.
Governor Sununu, you said you're not going to endorse anybody. You don't plan on endorsing anybody. But we remember from the Mitt Romney campaign of 2012, you were probably the most outspoken, active, and from our perspective in talk radio, the most engaging and entertaining advocate for the Romney campaign. Do you plan on being involved in this campaign regardless of who the nominee is?
Yeah, I will support obviously the Republican nominee, and since I'm old and cranky, people may ask me to do that again.
Well, I didn't want to say it, but that's what made it so good. You didn't care. I'm John Sununu. I'll say whatever I want. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I will.
Thanks for joining us,
Governor.
Listen,
Governor, it's a delight to have you. Thanks a lot.
Well, have me on again.
We will.
I'd love to. Quiet Man. By the way, The Quiet Man already #1 on Amazon's U.S. Presidents category, and it just hit this week.
Yeah.